So Bob Trelease has spent a fair amount of time teaching gross anatomy and has taught with a number of us, including Earl, and has accumulated a large number of photographs that display the life of the department, the life of teaching gross anatomy that was so important for Earl during his time here at UCLA. So,
wanted to show, start out with a picture that really says quite a bit about what kind of a teacher Earl was, and also for those of you who remember the good old days of the golden days of anatomy at UCLA. This should give you some memories. Over on the far right, Ron Harper's still here, so he's one of the people who remembers these days. This was the last day of anatomy class in 1978. Okay, folks, it's about 40 years old. And you see Tom Sawyer in the middle, and on the right is Carmen Clemente, and on the left is Earl. And also, second from your left is a fellow named Raymond Jack Last. Was an Australian who was with the Royal College of Surgeons who visited here on a yearly basis, and he was just the most prodigious lecturer. And in fact, this is after his last lecture on the lymphatics of the head and the neck, and he used to draw like a demon, so everybody wanted to draw like Ray, and he was just wonderful. Earl was really, in a major sense, the left hand of Tom Sawyer. So Tom Sawyer ran the class. Carmen was the right hand. Before we went into the anatomy lab, we would view for many years Carmen Clemente's, they were videos for a while, films, early dissection films, and that would set the tone for the laboratory. But Carmen and Ray both like to give you little mini lectures in the laboratory, and Earl was really the person who taught most directly from the cadavers. So you've heard about his scientific background. I'll come back to his athletic nature in a moment. But Earl really deeply knew gross anatomy dissection and was fantastic in the laboratory, an absolutely great teacher. This is one of my favorite pictures, a little bit out of date, a little bit out of focus. And so I think Earl actually scrawled that up there. And you were told that he had the dubious responsibility for the World Body Program at some point, and I guess he was also, when I was there early on, the graduate advisor. Dare say this is before Paul graced us with his presence, but it's even older, Paul. And you notice there on the lower right, his favorite area, spinal cord with dorsal and ventral roots and dorsal root ganglion. And he's explaining the mysteries of how the spinal cord is wired on an anatomical basis to the medical students in the lab. And there used to be blackboards in the lab. There are a few whiteboards now in our rebuilt lab from the early part of the millennium. But Earl could draw with the best of them. And Earl could integrate this on the spot when he was teaching to people. He really didn't have to compete in any way with Ray Last. Ray Last used to actually prepare his diagrams. And as I said before, Earl was really a great teacher in the lab, very practical, and he really kept things in line in the lab. One of the things that I learned from Earl, and I learned from the other faculty members, and was that it was really important when I joined the faculty that later on in the 80s that you always attended the other faculty members' lectures. And the anatomy faculty, and this is the 73105 lecture hall, and the faculty would always sit up in the, from the speaker's point of view, upper left-hand corner of the room. And since this was, I think, this was 1977, there was probably some wondering who this guy with the camera was. This is not way before the days of the selfie, so I was carrying a 35 millimeter camera around. And again, there's Ron Harper, and Ron had the distinction of being sentenced to teach in medical gross anatomy, and actually went on to teach his own gross anatomy classes, and he was there when I arrived. And also, some of you may recognize Roger Gorski there with his Burt Reynolds mustache. Okay, now this is a serious lecture, you understand, so everybody's looking really intent, and I suppose Earl's wondering what the heck I'm doing with that camera. But sometimes things got really lively, and here's the faculty row again, and there's Earl busting up, there's Carmen Clemente and Ron again. This is actually the last day, and they're laughing at something that Ray Last said. Ray was crack up in some of his lectures. And then there's Emery Zimmerman, who's in the corner, who's no longer with us. So I'm going to show this for a while and just say that I want to reemphasize something that Paul said and also Barry said. As a graduate student who arrived in the department in 1977, I got inculcated into the Society of Teaching in Anatomy at UCLA. And so I learned about laboratory teaching. I learned about the proper place to sit if you're going to be faculty or you're going to be teaching anatomy. But then I also learned about Earl Eldred, whom I first called a vital anatomist on my title slide, but really I could as easily call him a physical anatomist for all the reasons that Paul stated. And so Barry showed that, you know, he's an avid outdoorsman. My personal acquaintance with something that Paul mentioned is I was TAing and I was working in the laboratory a lot, and I was working on a weekend, and the graduate students had to come in on the weekend to get things done, and we opened the laboratory, and then the door opened up, and in walks Earl in running shorts with a sweaty shirt. And my goodness, you know, where you been? Well, I just ran in for my home because it's my birthday. And so that was my first acquaintance, and over the years, I knew that he definitely made a point of running from his home into UCLA and back. And as a runner at that point, made a really great impression on me. He's younger than I ever was, I suppose. And so I saw him as the most physical and the most vital and a really good role model for someone who is going to be in the very competitive world of sciences. Is that, let's say, mens sana and sana corpore. Keep your body healthy and exercise, and that will certainly help you. Earl also participated, in addition to the teaching, in a number of situations as the anatomy department aged, if you will. And this is a picture from a convocation, and I forget exactly when that was. I don't know if Paul knows or Ron knows. I think it was the early 90s. And the way the Department of Anatomy went, it was simply the Department of Anatomy was founded, and then near the end of the 80s, there was a discussion about the department evolving and what should it be. And I remember one of the decisions was the neurobiology department, and the other decision was the Department of Anatomy and Neurobiology. And so we had some convocations, and Earl did some presentations of the convocations. The graduate program was under consideration. If you look at the crowd, you can see, let's see, Dave Maxwell's there in white and just about the middle of the picture with a tie, obviously Earl. Some guest speakers, graduate students. Ellen Dirksen is at the far left. Anna Taylor is there in blue, looking at the camera. And so the Department of Anatomy became the Department of Anatomy and Cell Biology, and Earl was still involved in organization. And Ed Cooper's here, and he's in the middle. He's preparing to make some comments about the new changes. And there's Tom Sawyer to his left, and Paul is acting as doorstop there. I like to call this picture all the usual suspects. So I've seen it a few times. And there at the right is Earl and Bert. So we got used to seeing Bert at a number of events. And here is Earl unveiling the new department display case for the Department of Anatomy and Cell Biology that he worked on. And there's Ed Cooper there. It's a tag team event. And here's Earl and Bert, excuse me. It's a good spoonerism. Nick. I thought I saw Nick Brecka walk in. Yeah, there's Nick. And Sid Golub and Ron Harper, and looks like Jaime Villablanca. Earl was respected and loved by the faculty and the students, and I mean all of the students. Now I'm stepping ahead to a couple of years. I think this is the package said 92. So I believe this is 92, maybe September or something in 92. And so there's Anna Taylor and it's Arnie Scheibel there. And for those of you who've been there, you would recognize Casa Scheibel in the valley. And there to your right, to Anna Taylor's left is Earl. And there's Anna Taylor's husband there, next to Earl. And this occasion was, I believe, Earl Eldred's retirement. His retirement party, his going emeritus party. So Earl did a bit of a presentation, and I'm doing this somewhat in the style of current fad in education now that lectures are being rediscovered. It's a sort of a just-in-time lecture. So if anybody has any additions, please feel free to correct me. Fran Grover, who was shown in the initial image, is sort of in the middle of the top, and then Dave Maxwell with the hat, and a few other people. I think my wife's in there somewhere. It's Ron Harper and Becky Harper. And then here's another view, Reggie. Reggie's up there saying some good words, and perhaps Reggie can fill us in a bit more on the circumstances. So I thought it was safe, but I guess Reggie's dressed in academic drag today, so I get to be casual. Francis Grover. So what Earl taught in gross anatomy when he was lecturing was really the musculoskeletal. Okay, so he was not a person to carry on a lot about the esoterics, and you've seen from his scientific career, he could have regaled students with a lot of details, but he was straight to the point. He was a straight shooter. He was sincere. He reminded me a lot of seeing those hiking pictures of Scoutmasters. So I remember I was a Boy Scout and went on a lot of hikes, and I think Earl could have been the Scoutmaster of the group. I also noticed that he's wearing shorts. So Earl was one of the few anatomy faculty members I ever saw in shorts. Never did see the weight room because I was not really a weightlifter like your glorious chairman there. At any rate, this is also at that same occasion, and I think these are some posters of the history of the department and the school that were brought together and some of Earl's favorite historical books that people were admiring. And the cake down here, if you turn it on the side, it says Happy Days, Earl. So that was Earl's birthday cake. And there's Earl and Berg with Irene Fryer. The older, more distinguished faculty members here would remember her as the formidable department manager who was the great surgeon Percival Bailey's daughter. And here's Earl cutting in. There's Reggie in the background, and Dick Young. Okay, so one thing that really stuck with me, and I was searching all over the place, and I finally found it, is I had a really strong memory of Earl Eldred after everybody else had left. Now, Irene was in the swimming pool with a number of the staff. This was a very big party. This really filled up, show you how many people really wanted to honor Earl. Completely filled up Arnie Scheibel's massive backyard. And Arnie has this really wonderful pool, and then Irene was in there with a bunch of other people. And after a lot of people left, Earl got into some Levi's cutoffs and went swimming. And this is Earl at his retirement party doing a handstand off of the diving board. I wish I was close enough, but it's too bright, but that's Earl. So that's one of my signature memories of Earl. He did a handstand off of the diving board at his retirement party. Of course, he really didn't retire. He stayed around for, well, I don't know, better part of 20 years, shared an office with Tom Sawyer for a long time. I would go in there, and as you were told, when he was in editing mode, he would spread out on this desk. In his old lab, he had a big drafting board, and he would frequently be seen with an optivisor, magnifying glasses with the top up. And when the anatomy teaching group moved to another department, to be unnamed here, we ended up occupying space around the corner from where Tom and Earl's office was. So I saw Earl quite often in the following years, but I don't have any pictures of that. I'd like to sort of sum up by, refer to my notes here. So Earl was a great teacher. I'll just repeat myself. He was a very practical teacher. He was straightforward. He also had a great sense of humor. Playful at times, but always serious when he was teaching, and not getting carried away with esoteric detail like some people get the reputation to when they teach who are basic sciences medical students. So sure, I was in the graduate program, but so much of what we did, since we shared the classes with the medical students, were the main recipients of his knowledge and wisdom in the anatomy lab, numerically, were the medical students. So all of his colleagues respected Earl and cherished him. He was a major role model to me and other students. Personally, a great role model for a scientist and an educator who really respected physical exercise and practice health up until his later days. So in the post-millennial days, now we're doing a lot of what Dave Maxwell used to call stealth teaching, or as I like to call it, selfie learning. And the role of being a teacher in anatomy has sort of waned. I think it's very regrettable in many ways what has happened to medical education. And most regrettable is that, unfortunately, the medical students won't have an exposure to a great teacher like Earl Eldred was. And I know I miss him still. Every now and then I think I'm going to come in and, yeah, he's going to be in that office, but I think Paul may have turned it into a microscope room. So I've got to.
I did.
I've got to suspend my disbelief on that. So I miss him, even as he lives on in my pictures and in our memories. Thanks.